The Congress says it consulted many economists on the minimum income guarantee scheme. In fact, Rahul Gandhi has named you and said you were consulted as well. Were you?
I talked to Congress people, of course, and I talked to people from other parties. Now, I have talked about the scheme, yes.
So when you say you've talked about the scheme, there are many in the BJP who are raising heckles to this and saying that how are you having political dialogues, and is this a political conversation that you're having?
When people ask me how do we, how does give us some ideas on some of these issues, I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants ideas on economic issues.
And it's so
and this scheme is, has economic foundations. After all, it's a direct benefit transfer, which is part of the JAM trilogy which the government has been pushing. So in that sense, I don't see why it's particularly political.
But Dr. Rajan, do you endorse the minimum income guarantee scheme? Because one of the things that it has done, at least in the last 2 or 3 days since it was announced, is it has got the narrative back to the basics as far as elections is concerned. But do you particularly endorse this, and do you believe this narrative is going to be here to stay because this concerns the common man?
Look, I mean, there's a common theme in the last 2 governments, which has been that we need to figure out a way to make direct benefit transfers so that people have the money, they are more empowered, and they can pick and choose how they spend it, right? So trust the people has been a common theme. And to my mind, this is an extension of that idea. How do we get more power to the people as direct poverty alleviation? Now, what has to be sort of figured out, which is why I understand there's a committee that is going to be set up and so on, is the details, how this works, how it fits with the fiscal space, issues like that.
Do you believe it's become political because there was something called Kisan Samman that was talking about 6,000 rupees a year, this is talking about 72,000, that pales in comparison to this. Do you believe that is where the politics comes in?
The real issue is there are 2 sources of distress in the economy today. One is agricultural distress, and the other is the poverty that we've always had. And the question is, how do we alleviate both? And I would think that the way we want to do it is sort of do this as a way of bringing people back into the mainstream, not as a permanent process.
But as far as the fiscal viability of this is concerned, is it a given it can't be done without higher taxes, and so should one brace up for taxes on inheritance, on wealth, business turnover? Is higher taxes a given?
Look, I think the amount of space this will consume, or any scheme, depends on what all is being run at the same time.
True.
I mean, as you said, we have now a scheme of direct transfers to agriculture. We have this scheme. How much do they overlap? How much can you reduce the extent of overlap so the same person is not getting from multiple sources?
True.
And of course, we have myriad other schemes. And the question is, can we look at all of them and see what is effective, what is not? Ultimately, you will have to create fiscal space for this, whether it is through higher taxes or cutting spending on less effective schemes is something that will have to be opined on by the next government.
The temptation in India is to keep piling up scheme one after the other, and it's obviously political suicide to wane any of those off. Do you believe the success of this will lie in getting through that distortion, waning away what exists and then getting this on?
A planning phase in which you figure out what you give, at the same time you have a sense of what is superfluous, is necessary, right? That you're trying to effectively create room for what is more effective. And that, to my mind, is very important. That and that's why I think the rollout process that I've read about sort of makes sense. That you want to do it in a deliberate way.
You know, when Manrega was launched and there were skeptics around it, but truth be told, it did democratize the right to work. It gave people, at least in the rural areas, a minimum wage. It set a certain benchmark beyond which payments had to be made. Is this scheme, in that sense, as big an idea that will capture the political mind space? So that is one question. And B, is it an obvious extension of Manrega in many ways?
I mean, a lot has to be seen as it plays out. I think the idea that you want to target the very poor and give them the ability to build livelihoods makes sense. But at the same time, whatever you create, you don't want that to hold people back from looking for jobs, from going out into work.
Sure.
I think looking at the work of Abhijit Banerjee, who's been one of the big players in this, there certainly are levels of support at which it doesn't prevent people from going out to look for work, but helps them create some of the human capital that is necessary for them to be contributing citizens in the economy.
Is there a tacit admission that growth in itself is not going to be that rising tide which will lift boats, that will alleviate poverty? It is not as if productivity will go up and, because of growth and things will be taken care of. We will perhaps need to put cash in pockets of people for poverty to be eradicated.
First, I think every industrial country has set a minimum safety net. And as we grow wealthier, we have to think about what that is. But second, I think these are two hands, and you need both to clap. On the one hand, you need to create the jobs so that people can actually go out into the workforce. On the other hand, you also need people to have a basic level of capacity. If you have kids who don't have adequate nutrition and therefore cannot function, if they haven't been adequately schooled, what kind of labor are they going to do? So basically, to create the capacity, that is one set of transfers, but you don't want a permanently dependent set of the population. You want them to be able to go to the workforce, for which you need to create jobs. So I would say, ultimately, a job is the best form of inclusion, but jobs require capacity also, and we need both.